Good afternoon, guys, and welcome again to today's edition of The Law and You. I'm your host, yours truly, attorney at law Shellon, Washington, licensed in the state of New York, and also licensed in my home country, Guyana, and also in the Twin Island of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And today I'm going to be teaching you or explaining to you about a trust and how to protect family assets in a trust during a divorce. Now, this is mainly for those people who have acquired some sort of assets, wealth, or you're on your way up to acquiring wealth. So let me tell you guys, a marriage is really a financial contract. For those of you who think marriage is about love, let me fix your thought process and you're thinking about what a marriage really is. Some people go into a marriage and thinking, oh, it's for love, it's for, it's for, I mean, part of it is happiness, of course. You want to be happy with your partner. You want to be able to do things with your partner and, feel excited and happy. But the biggest part of a marriage is a financial agreement between two parties. And the main reasons why people go together is that they can build financially together. So the things that you can do by yourself, you will rely on that partner and that partner will rely on you. It's called a symbiotic relationship where both parties are heavily reliant on each other. And of course, there are instances where people go into a marriage and they already have everything pretty much. So they're not relying on anyone for anything. So they're bringing every single thing to the table. In that case, it's called a relationship where one person is dependent on the other. One party is a dependent spouse, and one party is considered the money spouse. So there are many instances where you're going to find a money spouse enter into a relationship with somebody who has nothing. So this is why most people will tell you, at least when I was growing up as a teenage girl and as a young woman in my 20s, I was always told to marry my equal. There's a reason why you're told to either marry your equal or marry up. Because if you are incapable of providing for yourself, then you need to marry up. But if you're capable, you have all the tools and you want to pursue education, whatever it is, to create your own business, your own wealth, then you must always consider marrying your equal. And there's a reason for this. If you marry your equal, then you and your partner will equally contribute towards the financial construct that you guys have built over the years. Typically, a husband and a wife, they're going to build financially. They're going to pool their resources. It's going to be his money and her money. And there's instances where the husband is going to be pouring everything into the home, and the wife would have the opportunity to save her money. In a situation where you have two equal party, but the husband is pouring everything into the home, he's paying the mortgage, he's paying the children's school fee, he's buying the car, he's doing everything, and the woman is equal, she might have the opportunity to save her money. And when that happens, in the event that there is a divorce, what typically happens is everything gets split down the middle. So all that money that the wife has been saving, whether or not she been putting it into a trust, she been putting it into whatever. She been buying, let's say she was buying stocks in the stock market or whatever it is, all that money gets pulled into the pool of assets that the court will be, would have access to determine who gets what and what goes where. Now, I'm going to teach you today how to avoid that happening. How to avoid when, because I tell you, this is heartening. I've seen it so many times. And one of the most recent occasion I can remember this happening, the lady actually came back to me. The woman was my client, obviously. She came back to me and she said, the husband went and he spoke to the people in the church, and the church and this buddy, and he talked to the family and everyone, and they told her not to go through with the divorce. Now, the reason why this would happen, now let me explain. The parties purchased a property together. That was their biggest asset, and that house was worth somewhat a lot. Now, if had she gone through with the divorce, her income would not have been sufficient to refinance the property or assume the mortgage into her own name. Neither was the husband, because their income was virtually identical, similar. He was working for a certain amount and her income was close to his. So neither one of them could stand on their own financially to take over the mortgage on the house. So in that case, the house would end up being sold and the equity would have been split between them. And this is one of the reasons why you need to create a financial situation between you and your spouse, that if at any point that spouse agrees to leave or you agree to leave that marriage, financially you will protect your future and protect your children's future. If you don't protect your future and your children's future, you would have some crazy spouse ruining the lives of all of the parties together. Some people are not very educated, they're not very wise, they're not very smart. So what you need to do is understand upfront. Everyone needs to understand upfront, when you get into a marriage, that a marriage is not what you think it is, but it's really a financial contract. You guys are binding yourself financially, and you're agreeing that you're going to pool your financial resources together for the benefit of those behind you. A lot of the times it's not just for you. Of course, you want to have assets to what use when you retire, because you do not want to retire without assets. So if you have the requisite assets to retire on, great. And then those assets are eventually going to pass down to your children. So now let's get into what you can do to make sure that that financial contract that you entered into with your spouse is secure and no one breaches that contract. Because I'm telling you, men, women all over breaches that contract just because of selfish reasons. A lot of people have selfish desires that they can't control, and they will run crazy just to satisfy those desires. That's how people are. So to protect your children's future and to protect your own future, this is what you do. If you enter into a marriage with a person of your equal, of course, because this will not be applicable if the parties are not equal. If the parties are not equal, a different set of rules would apply, because obviously at that point, one spouse would be the money spouse, and the money spouse would need protection more than the dependent spouse. So these rules are more applicable to a situation where you're both equal, you're both bringing something to the table, and you both, if there's a problem or the relationship ends, you're both entitled to walk away with something, not where you're unequally yoked. So please, let this be restricted to that purpose where the parties are equally yoked. They both have the same income. And let's say one day one of the parties, either the husband or the wife, goes home and they go in whatever crisis they might be going through. A lot of people go through midlife crisis, all sorts of crisis. But let's say they're going through some sort of situation and they decide, you know what, let's go our separate ways. I can't live like this anymore. What do you do? How do you protect the assets from getting split down the middle by the court? Outside of you having a stipulation of settlement or a separation agreement between the two of you you're working out, the best way to do is, if you should enter any marriage with somebody without a prenuptial, you and your spouse should sit down after you have children and create what is called a family trust. A family trust is a sure way to protect your assets. If you create an irrevocable trust, and in that irrevocable trust, every single asset that you acquire together during the marriage, you're going to take it and you're going to throw it into that trust. throw it as a part of that trust. So the Schedule A or the Exhibit A onto the trust will constantly change. And as you change it, you will do a supplemental trust to make sure that that asset is considered part of your trust. So if you do acquire, let's say you acquire real property, which is the most common type of asset I see married people acquire together. You acquire a 401k, you acquire a deferred compensation. Of course, the pension, a different set of rules will apply to that. Those comes with death benefit, but you wouldn't care so much about those because the wherever you're working, the rules of that pension will determine what happens to it. But in the case of a situation where the parties have real estate together, they have 401k, deferred compensation, they have stock on the stock market that they've invested in, they have significant amount of personal assets. Let's say they have jewelry worth millions or thousands of dollars, expensive personal items. The best way to deal with that is you create what is called a family trust. Now, in the family trust, you make sure that the trust is irrevocable, meaning the trust can never ever be revoked, no matter what. The trust cannot be revoked. And if you do a situation like that where you create a trust, make sure that the trust is irrevocable, that no one can revoke the trust no matter what. Then you put all those assets into that. And there must be a provision in the trust that says, regardless of the status of the parties, the trust will not be revoked. So you put a clause in there, and in addition to the trust stating that it's irrevocable, because as you know, a revocable trust can still, an irrevocable trust, you can still approach the court under certain circumstances and ask that the trust be revoked. But if in that trust you make it air sealed tight, ironclad tight, that no one can penetrate it, no one can get it revoked because of the languages that you use in the trust, then it means that even if your partner decides that they're going to walk through the door, they're going to leave the marriage, the trust will stand. And it will stand in the name, the property will stand and remain in the names of the trustees. So when the spouse say, oh, I'm going to go to court and divorce you, and I'm going to ask for my share of the asset, sorry, you can't, because it's tied up in a trust and you cannot get it out of the trust. The only thing you can do for the rest of your life is live as a beneficiary and use the benefits of the trust for your lifetime. But you will not, however, be able to have the asset sold and to walk away with anything. So guys, this is something that you need to consider. If you have assets with your husband, with your wife, and we can't predict the future. I tell people all the time, you can predict your own actions. You know what you intend to do, but you don't know what that other person is planning. You don't know what's in the head of that person. So the best way to avoid a situation down the road where you find yourself in a court dividing asset is to put language into an irrevocable trust that makes it impossible for that person to even go to the court and ask for any marital assets, because at that point there will be none. All of the asset has been transferred over to a trust, and I'm so sorry, you would not be able to do anything. You can get the divorce, but you will not be entitled to any assets. You will not be entitled to ask for any spot. Well, the support going to be a different situation, because if, as we spoke before about the money spouse and the dependent spouse is always going to be able to go and approach the court and ask for financial support. But if it's a case where the parties are equal, like I said, and like I said, this advice is mostly suitable for a situation where the spouse are equal. They're on equal footing. They're contributing the same amount into the household. Their income is about the same. And they went and they acquired these assets together. The best way is to put those assets into a family trust. So, no matter what happens at that point, what happens during the length of the relationship, the length of the marriage, for sure that the property will remain secured in a family trust, and no one can change that. Another way, guys, in which you also might help to secure the property before a divorce is if you do a separation agreement. A lot of people miss this. If you're having trouble, and I think I I spoke to you about this in the earlier video where I discussed about separation agreement and how it is you can protect your asset in a separation agreement. So it has to avoid the court having to get involved in your business and tell you what to do. If you want to avoid the court having to direct you and tell you what to do with your own assets, if you're ever find yourself in a situation with your spouse where you guys determine that the marriage is no longer working and somebody wants to go their way, go execute a separation agreement. And make sure when you execute that agreement, you put language what that makes that agreement irrevocable, or nobody can destroy or terminate that separation agreement. If the separation agreement cannot be terminated, then whatever you put in that separation agreement that you're entitled to or your spouse is entitled to, no one, not even the court, could undo that. That's there and written in stone. You make sure your spouse who is signing it gets their name notarized. Once your spouse notarizes their signature, it has valuable force and effect just the same way as if it's been allocated in a court of law. So your spouse got no way out of that. They're bound, sealed, and buried. So guys, make sure if you are in a situation, if you're in a marriage and you think you're on shaky grounds, go get a family trust. Even so, if you think you're on shaky grounds, go get a separation agreement. Once you're on speaking terms and once things are fine, that's the best thing to do early up front. Get yourself a family trust or get yourself a separation agreement. That way you don't have to worry about no court making no pronouncement over your assets. And I'm telling you, you do not want the court to make important decisions about your life or your children's life. One thing about the court never considers what happens to your children financially. The court doesn't care that you've purchased property to secure your children's future. They do not care that you've invested on Wall Street or wherever you've invested to secure your children's future. They do not care about any of these things. The court's outlook of the whole situation is very narrow. All they're thinking about is whatever the party is acquired together needs to be divided, and they move on the basis of dividing the assets between the party at that level and no other level. So you've got to be your own vigilante. You got to watch over for yourself. You've got to be your own advocate and make sure you put these things in order before you get to any court. Make sure you put your own life in order. Don't let no court make a decision for you. There are a lot of blind people out there, blindly walking, blindly following, and they are not even conscious of what is happening and what the court and the things that the court can do to ruin your life. Don't let a court ruin your life. Take your life into your own hands and make your own conscious decision. Like I said, the trust is going to put the assets into a trustee's name. A trustee is going to hold that asset for you. And you can choose any trustee of your taking. And this trust is not just for a situation where a husband and wife, and there might be something happening down the road, but you can use a trust if you are single and you have a lot of assets and you want to get married. Use that trust and protect your asset, because sometimes, not all times, the person you're marrying is going to want to sign a prenuptial or a postnuptial. There are instances where people are going to tell you, like, don't you trust me? They're going to try to finesse their way into you and say, well, don't you trust me? Why would you even have such a thought that we might even divorce? Why can't we just marry without worrying about what's going to happen in the future? Don't buy that bait. Don't get bait into it. Always protect yourself. If you have assets and you would like to marry someone, get a trust. Put your assets in. If the party is refusing to sign a prenup, don't wait for him or her to agree to sign the prenup. Go put your property in a trust so that when you marry him or her, that property is forever sealed, bound, and protected. So if somebody walks into your life only for the purpose of getting assets from you or only for the purposes of using you, they will never be able to use you because you've already protected yourself. before you even got into that marriage by putting your assets into a trust. In that case, the trust will be your name. It will be named after you. So in this case, my name is Shellon Washington. It will be the Shellon Washington's Trust. Or you can name it your family trust. But the beneficiaries are going to be yourself and your children, yourself and your own family, the new spouse that you're marrying. If you want to make them a beneficiary, eventually you can do a supplement to the trust by amending it and putting that person also as a beneficiary under the trust. But you guys, you do not need to leave yourself exposed. Do not trust people under any circumstances whatsoever. And always watch your back, because you don't know sometimes what people are planning ahead for you. And a lot of times I hear clients say, if they only knew, or if they only thought, or if they only think this person would have turned this way. Like, come on, guys. You cannot predict people. And this is why people should always earn your trust, and you should never trust people up front. Because when you trust people up front, you put your whole life on the line for somebody, and then it turns back that it doesn't work. And then they tries to finesse themselves to the court to get what they need from you. You know, I've seen a situation with a client. He worked for years. It's about maybe like it's a gap between him and the wife, the ex-wife. Now it was a big gap, maybe like 10 years gap or whatever. I've seen this person marry, divorce. The first wife that the divorce didn't take anything from them. The first wife said, listen, I don't want your pension, I don't want anything, and she just walked her way. But then he marries again, and he marries the second wife, who's at least 10 years younger than him. And he left himself exposed, because the second wife, this is why I tell people also, be careful when you bring these people from Guyana, because they come to America and they become Americanized. Not only Guyana, but whichever country, you're from. Be careful with you going to marry these people and bring them up here to the United States. Be very careful. So, he marries this woman, he brings this woman to America, and they live for a little bit, and then the relationship became very volatile and turbulent, and then eventually it had to end up in a divorce. Needless to say, the woman that he brought ended up committing adultery. She ended up cheating in the marriage, and I need not say the entire story of what happened after she cheated, but let's just say the evidence remained. You could have seen that she actually cheated because there was evidence, right? I'm not going to tell you what that evidence was, but I think people could imagine what that evidence was from that cheating. So now she wants to divorce. And guess what? She wanted his pension. She wanted his retirement account. She wanted his bank account. She wanted everything that he had. Even though the evidence, I could tell you what the evidence is. The evidence was the result a child came into this world from the infidelity. And she wanted every single thing that this man had. Now, I tell you this to say you have always got to be very cautious and protective of yourself, because if that woman wasn't so bold-faced, he would have been fine. But the woman, in addition to being unfaithful and bringing evidence of her infidelity to him, she wanted to take this man down with every single thing. But he was very strong. He fought back, and he prevailed. He prevailed to some extent, because the things that she wants, she ended up not getting. What he was offering her is mostly what she ended up getting. He could have even risked going to jail, but that didn't happen. Every time she fought, he fought back. He had a hard time because, as you know, the courts, when it comes to men are not treated, with the way women are treated in the court system. The court is very brutal with men because, as you know, guys, men are always looked at as the ones who're supposed to provide. You're supposed to take care of your family. You're supposed to take care of your household. And that's exactly what ended up, happening. So that's why you got to be careful as a man. You want to bring someone, fine, bring them, but put your assets in a trust, or create like I did the video before on the prenuptial and the postnuptial, and I explained the difference. The last video I did was the one before last week was on the post-nuptial. So the post-nuptial is only comes into play if the spouse is willing. The spouse has to be willing to do it. And just note, guys, that this trust doesn't work unless you put your assets into the trust before you marry that spouse. Don't wait after you marry the spouse and then put the property into the trust. Put it into the trust prior to marrying the person. Because if you run to do it in a trust after the marriage, it's not going to work. The only way it could work is if you show that the property which is placed in the trust was pre-acquired assets, has nothing to do with your current spouse. Your current spouse did not contribute towards that asset, had no input into that asset, then you can do it that way. But the most likely way that you're going to prevail and be able to protect your assets is if you put your property into a trust before the marriage. Or in a case where the parties are separated, you have a separation agreement in stone, written in stone, ironclad, and there's no way possible that anybody can touch your assets. You make the language so concrete and so secure that even if you remarry, even if you decide you're going to go back together, that agreement will remain in place because it clearly states, regardless of the status of the relationship with the parties, that agreement shall remain in place. So guys, you got to be extra careful, know what you're doing, and protect yourself at all costs. I know all of us, we like to think that, okay, we need to keep our assets, we need to build assets, but think about this carefully. Anytime you decide that you're going to marry and you already have your assets, think about these things carefully. Listen to this video as many times as you want to, but ensure that you always protecting yourself, protect your assets for your children and for your grandchildren. And it could be passed on from generation to generation, because once you put it in that trust, you do not need to worry. You could put language in the trust to make the trust perpetual. And I'll tell you this, the trust could be perpetual if you live in the United States. But if you live in Ghana, there's the rule against perpetuity. So you really can't make a trust perpetual in Ghana, but a trust, or the Caribbean, as a matter of fact, but you can make a perpetual trust in the United States, in the state of New York. All you have to do is make it so that they can be successive trustees. Trustees can appoint it. As trustee die, a new trustee can be appointed, and like that. So, or a trustee can retire from the trust and appoint a new trustee. And in that manner, you don't have to worry, period. Your trust will continue in perpetuity until the trustees decide, okay, we want to sell this house or we want to sell this property. We don't want the trust to continue. But by that time, you will no longer be here anyway. So you wouldn't care if at some point the trustees decide on a vote that they want to wind the trust up. But guys, those are the two ways to protect your asset. Once you're already in a marriage, you can do that. Or you can do it before you get married, just to make sure you protect your retirement assets, you protect your assets from a divorce, from going to a court, from any court having to have a hand or a say in what happens to your assets between you and your wife. That's the best way. Guys, thank you so much. The time is almost up. It was a pleasure being here today, teaching you about how to protect your assets. I like to tell people, don't wait for no judge make decisions, because the judge is making the decisions based on the law, and the law doesn't have heart, it doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have emotion, but you do. And because you have a heart, a feeling, and emotions, make sure you do not leave these personal things, like your assets, your business regarding your retirement, in the hands of no judge. Take charge of your life before you get to a judge, so that all you must be doing if you're ever going to be divorcing, is going before the judge to get the divorce decree, and that's it. And you walk out whole, intact, with all of your assets. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me today. It was my pleasure teaching you about protecting your assets in a marriage prior to divorce, using a trust or using a separation agreement. Guys, I'm going to see you again next week at the same time. Next week, I'm going to come live. I'll probably be having a guest because I'll be in a different country next Saturday, but I will bring you again live the show as always. Thank you guys so much for your support. And I want you to press the like button and share this video so that the people who need to hear this type of content will be exposed to it. Guys, thank you so much. If you need consultation, my number is right there across the screen, 718-877-3100. My office is located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. Guys, call. Consultation is free always. So give me a call if you need advice on anything as it relates to the areas of law that I practice. And you will see our page. We have a Facebook page. Follow the page and also hit the like button and share this video. Thank you so much, guys. See you again next week.